We're going to look at Thomas this morning, and we're going to look at Thomas, yes, at that very end about that instance when Jesus had that appearing. But let's look at him kind of overall first. First, let's see some Thomas facts. We find that he is first introduced as being one of Jesus' 12 chosen apostles. And so you read in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Then we would also see he saw the miracles. No, at all the miracles, it's not that Thomas is named specifically. But we do know, of course, that the apostles were the companions of Jesus, and they were the ones present with him as he was doing these miracles. We find, of course, he would have been there with a feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6. We also would assume he was there at the raising of the dead son of the widow of Nain. And by the way, this is resurrection. Now this child would be raised to die again, but nevertheless a resurrection. But we would also see he was present, and we would know for sure he was present at the raising of Lazarus, as just prior to going back to Bethany, Thomas is mentioned. But once again, this miracle was a resurrection. Yes, Lazarus raised to die again, but nevertheless a resurrection. And of course, when you think about Thomas, you're thinking about, doubting, I want to say believing, but sometimes we'd say doubting Thomas, and it had to do with Jesus' resurrection. But he had already seen resurrections. What's the significance of these miracles? We find in John 20, beginning in verse 30, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life through his name. Now I recognize this John 20, 30, and 31 is saying, as we read, we can have that faith. But think how it must have been for those disciples in the presence of Jesus to witness these miracles. Mustn't they have been faith building? And so to realize Thomas seeing miracles, but also even seeing the miracle of resurrection, we'd think here a strong believer, Thomas, having seen not only miracles, but resurrections. Thomas would have also heard the teaching, and this is significant because he would have heard teaching about faith. And we come to that, that final time we read about Thomas. It's all about faith there, isn't it? Well, Thomas has heard Jesus teaching about faith. One of those occasions, Matthew 8:26, and he said to them, "Why are you afraid?" This is that instance when the disciples, Jesus on that boat there in the Sea of Galilee, Jesus asleep, a big storm comes. Oh no, oh no! Jesus says to them, "Why are you afraid? O you of little faith." Then he arose, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. Some teaching about faith. O you of little faith. Matthew 14:31, Jesus immediately reached out his hand, took hold of him, saying, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Here, faith, you might say they're kind of back to back with the idea of doubt. Either you have faith and believe, or you doubt. No doubt Thomas heard these words. Moving on to Matthew 16 and verse 8. But Jesus, aware of this, said, "O you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? O you of little faith." Not only had he heard teaching about faith, but he had heard rebukes for having such little faith. And by the way, in each of these contexts, it would be so little faith in Jesus. Just think about it. Thomas saw the miracles, faith-building miracles. And hearing the rebukes of, why do you have so little faith? And it's faith in Jesus. Thomas, an apostle, he saw the miracles. He heard the teaching. He even heard teaching of Jesus about the resurrection. In Matthew 12, verse 40, for just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, teaching about the resurrection. Matthew 16:21. From that time Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Matthew 20, beginning in verse 17. And as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside, and on the way he said to them, see, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and he will be raised on the third day. So here is Thomas, an apostle, saw the miracles, even miracles of resurrection, heard the teaching about faith, particularly faith in Jesus, rebuked when there was little faith. And then he was told more than once by Jesus that Jesus would be resurrected. Now maybe this is to be considered, Luke 18:34, but they understood none of these things. The saying was hidden from them. They did not grasp what was said. Maybe that's kind of part of what's going on. Maybe it's going on more so with Thomas than the others. Think about Thomas. An apostle, saw the miracles, heard the teaching about faith, heard the teaching about Jesus' resurrection. But here's an interesting point about Thomas. He voiced his willingness to die with Jesus. Now, this was John 11, just prior to Jesus and his disciples going down to Bethany at Lazarus, having been sick, actually dead when they arrived, and Lazarus being resurrected. Okay, we're going to go down, and look what Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples. Let us also go, that we may die with him. At face value, and frankly, that's all we can assume here. Face value, I'm willing to die with Jesus. And here's why I say face value. You can read all kinds of things. And a few years back, I was reading about Thomas, and someone said, you know, Thomas was probably just very pessimistic. And maybe bordering sometimes on sarcastic. Yeah, let's just go too, and we'll all be dead. That would be pessimistic, sarcastic. But I just say this, you'd have to hear the words, see the expression, to walk away and say, he's pessimistic and sarcastic. When I read these words, I think in terms of, he is a brave disciple of Jesus Christ. Let's go. If it comes to it, we'll die with him. Thomas, a dedicated disciple, die with him. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. But you know, as we come to that passage towards the end of John, when we think about Thomas, this is what we tend to think about. We tend to forget about, well, he was one chosen 12 and a constant companion of Jesus, seeing the miracles, hearing the teaching. We probably forget that he was willing to die for Jesus in that instance of going down to Bethany. And suddenly we begin to read about these verses. Thomas absent. Thomas doubted. You know, as you're reading John 20, let's just read these verses. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week. So this is just 1 week since Jesus' resurrection. The doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." And when he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. And as the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you withhold forgiveness from any, it is withheld." Who was not there? Judas wasn't there. Oh, but he was not really expected to be there. After all, he was that one that with a kiss betrayed Jesus. And then so overcome with remorse at what he had done, he went out and took his own life. No. We don't expect Judas to be there. You know, Pilate was not there. You see, Pilate was that one, that Roman governor who condemned Jesus to death, who decided he'd rather be a friend to Caesar rather than a friend to Jesus. You didn't expect Pilate there, did you? Caiaphas. He was not there. He was the high priest, though not that year, and in fact the father-in-law to the present high priest, but still wielding a great deal of influence. And he was lending his influence for Jesus' death. But you didn't expect Caiaphas to be there, did you? Thomas was absent. And I have an idea why you would have expected him to be there. I would have. No, not Judas, not Pilate, not Caiaphas. We could probably name a whole lot more. We wouldn't expect to be there. But Thomas, he was one of those 12. And the remainder, of course, not Judas, he having taken his own life. All the rest were there. Thomas, why weren't you there? You know, if we're going to take that text and read and say, okay, it says specifically, here's why Thomas was not here. No, you don't read that. But I can't help but think, Thomas, why were you not there? Could it be that there was someone in his family that was sick? Could it be that there was someone in his family that was dead and he was having to see to their burial? Was it that he himself was very ill and unable to attend? I can't answer that, but I can tell you this. I don't think those things are implied. I think it's more so implied as he chose not to be there. And so then I'm kind of saying, why would you choose not to be there? Again, it doesn't say in a very specific way, but kind of the implication of what we read later about, unless I see holes in his hands and in his side, I'll not believe. Could it have been that he lost hope? Spiritually discouraged. Spiritually sick. And so, no, he's not there. I can promise you that there's people who are expected to be in the assembly this very morning who are not there across this land. And they're not there because they are spiritually discouraged, disheartened. They've lost heart, as it were. They're spiritually sick. And there's people who've just chosen other things to do. You know, fun and recreation are pretty important in our land. And you know it. And I think it's very, very sad when people choose recreation over religion. When they choose laying out in the sun over the Lord. Am I against vacations? No, I'm not against vacations. Am I against fun? No, I'm not against fun. But I'm against compromising the assembly on the Lord's Day with fun and recreation, and choosing that over the being present with my brethren. And you know, I had somebody said, Thomas, where were you? What answer would he have given? And kind of a by the way, if we absent ourselves from the Lord's Day assembly, what excuse do we have? And what do we say? You know, if we were going to say of the remaining disciples, who needed to be there the most? It was Thomas. It was Thomas. Because later when you read, we're going to, in just a moment, read those words. Words seemingly of doubt. Unless I see and touch those holes in his hand and inside. He was. Oh, the word doubt's not used in this context, but it's written all over it, isn't it? He was the doubter. It was his faith that was at the low ebb. He was the one that needed to be there the most. I have an idea too. Those who absent themselves from the assembly on the Lord's Day are the ones who need to be there the most. Thomas was absent. Look what Thomas missed. He missed, and this is number one, and this is the biggie. He missed Jesus. He missed the only one that was resurrected, never to die again. He missed seeing the certainty of the resurrection. And by the way, as Paul puts it, Jesus was the first fruits. In other words, the implication is that, yes, we all will be resurrected. He missed the certainty, even you might say, of his own resurrection. He missed the one who had changed the sobbing into singing. He missed peace, as Jesus said, peace be with you. He missed the promise, receive the Holy Spirit. He missed hearing, if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you withhold forgiveness from any, it is withheld. All of this, you see, Thomas missed. And let me ask you, what do you miss when you're absent from worship? Yep, you do miss important and vital things. Thomas was absent. We see that Thomas was doubtful. In John 20, beginning of verse 24, now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." Important news. You kind of have to tell it. You can't keep it in. "Thomas, we've seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." He's adamant. This is why we say doubting Thomas. Like I said, the word doubting, is not in these verses, not in any translation that I'm aware of. But it's written all over it, isn't it? Doubting Thomas. You know, as I read this, there's some things that kind of come to my mind. First of all, Thomas wanted the proofs that the others had been privileged to see by the fact that they were present. Jesus was there, and he showed them these hands, his side. Thomas wanted the proofs that the others had been privileged to see. So let's not be too hard on him, okay? They got these proofs. He says, "I want them too." But you know, one thing that comes to my mind is that the disciples come. "We've seen the Lord." Why would he so distrust the other disciples? What is he thinking? Is this some kind of bad joke? Why are you telling me such a thing? You know, I'm thinking, why did he have such a distrust of the other disciples when they say, "We've seen the Lord"? As well, had he forgotten completely what Jesus had said about his resurrection? You see, on more than one occasion, we've already noticed, Jesus told his disciples about being resurrected. Wait a minute. Thomas, they come and tell you. These are people that you would trust. Doesn't that kind of bring to mind, Jesus said, "I'll be resurrected"? Let's put two and two together here. But then we see Thomas was believing. Beginning in verse 26, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, another Sunday night, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. And put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Yes, Thomas was believing. Thomas did not miss that second Sunday night assembly. He was present. Why did he miss the first time? We're not really told. Why was he present the second time? We're not really told. But I can't help but think they said, "We've seen the Lord." Maybe they've goaded it. "Come with us, be with us. Perhaps Jesus will be with us again." We see an interesting thing just in the course of this. They were in a locked room. Jesus was there. That somehow he had power over the locked room. And then we see that Jesus offered to Thomas the very thing Thomas had said he needed to believe. And by the way, basically you could say it was the thing too that previously the disciples had had the privilege of seeing. But Jesus offered it. It's almost like, "Yep, I heard what you said to the disciples when they said, 'We've seen the Lord.' Here's my hands. Here's my side." You can be sure of this. God is seeing and hearing everything we do and say. And I can't help but think, when I read this, yes, it's because of what Thomas said. And Jesus knew what Thomas had said. And Thomas proclaimed, "My Lord and my God." We go from John 11, where Jesus and the disciples were returning to Bethany, and Thomas says, "Yes, let's all go and we'll die with him." To this point of doubt and disbelief. Then to the point of, "My Lord and my God." And when I read these words, I think he's going to never, ever doubt again. And I pray that you've come to the point in your life with such a faith, "My Lord and my God," and that you will never doubt, that you'll never disbelieve. But this faith will be strong, will see you through tough times, see you through when sometimes it's hard to obey. But you'll remember, He's my Lord, my God. You know, you only read of Thomas 2 more times, and that's just basically, you read of his name, that's about it. And you're not reading of what he's saying. Remember Thomas. Remember believing Thomas. Remember Thomas who said, "My Lord and my God." Yeah, but he doubted. We're bad, aren't we? We're really bad sometimes about wanting to. Remember the worst of someone's life in spite of all the other good. We're going to remember that one occasion of the sin that we know about. And forget about all those many occasions of obedience in the face of difficulty. Doubting Thomas. Believing Thomas. Lastly, as you look at doubt versus faith, doubt sees the obstacles, faith sees the way. Doubt sees the darkest night, faith sees the day. Doubt dreads to take a step, faith soars on high. Doubt questions, who believes? Faith answers, I. Let's be like that believing Thomas. If with faith you've turned from your sin, we can give you opportunity now to confess that faith, to be baptized, immersed into Jesus for the forgiveness of sins. This is what Jesus taught when they cried out, "Men and brethren, what should we do?" there in Acts chapter 2. And you have that opportunity this morning. If there's as well a need for prayer, we'd be glad to take that time and pray for you. If you need to come, please come as we stand and sing.